and admitting everybody.
Good. Lovely. I think we are just about to kick off, everybody. So I think there's plenty of people still just coming in through the lobby. So maybe give it 30 seconds or so. Cool. For those who are logged in, welcome. Lovely to see you all here. This is the webinar for the HR leadership, the transformation. It's an insightful, thought-provoking webinar where we will hopefully address some of those HR leadership challenges, the landscape, certainly from an Australia, New Zealand perspective. A little bit of housekeeping. The session will be recorded today. So you will, feel free to request that. There won't be a live chat. However, there will be preemptive questions that Melanie and I will look at towards the end of the presentation. So without further ado, my name is William Prest. I lead the HR executive hiring across the New South Wales region for Hays. My role extends to overseeing our regional agency recruitment divisions across HR, procurement, legal, and marketing, as well as our banking and insurance industries. We've got Mel here today.
Hi, everyone.
Good to see you, Mel. So I'm delighted. We're very lucky actually to have Mel on board with us. She is a trusted advisor for people leaders across various different industries. As a principal at McCabes Employment, Safety and Workplace Relations Group, Mel brings 20 years of legal experience and deep understanding of workplace relations. Her practical, tailored advice is informed by senior roles in Fair Work Ombudsman, Safe Work New South Wales, and in-house positions in finance and professional services. She's passionate about navigating the complexities of human behaviour in the workforce, and I don't want to embarrass you too much there, Mel. But how are you feeling today? You ready to go?
Good. Yeah, I'm excited. Hopefully we have a nice interactive audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Good stuff. Well, we're joining you from the very fresh Sydney this morning, and just to kick us off, I will acknowledge country. So if I can just navigate to the next slide. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I'm reaching you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, a nation known for its beauty, rich culture, iconic coastline and waterways. We extend this acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today and pay our respects to the elders past and present. So today we are going to, I'm personally going to be looking at our Chief People Officer Viewpoint report, a Hays white paper report that will talk to and discover some of the key findings from surveys that we have run very recently, talking about the sentiment, challenges and priorities of HR leaders across ANZ. Next, part two will be Melanie's opportunity to delve into the complex realities faced by today's senior HR professionals, including why it's harder than ever to be a senior people leader, how to lighten the load, and frontline service provision, where there will be some hopefully really insightful advice, guidance, and opportunity to elevate and put into practice in your roles. So I will kick us off just by talking a little bit about why we produced this report at Hays. So some of you may have seen our previous iteration of this, or it's a similar version, which was called the DNA of a HR director. This is a contemporary version, very much an evolution from that was many years ago, and is really, as I say, taking a snapshot of the sentiment of the HR leadership of ANZ. So 190 interviews were taking place, mostly C-suite individuals, but it's collective contribution from many HR leaders across the country. So I thank you for those who may be on the call who have provided their insights. There is a QR code there. If you haven't read the report, I would encourage you to do so. So looking into the survey findings, I will just pull up this page, and I think it will be fair to say that it's still, even in an environment where we've probably seen a little bit of a tapering of hiring and challenges with costs, there is still very much a challenge to find the right talent. So that came through with 62% indicating that. I think in a space where, or an environment where tools, technologies, systems and processes are ever improving and automating, it will lean into more requirement for human skills, and I think the data has shown that, but I think it's ever increasing as the emphasis on those softer skills, those human skills, become even more important for HR professionals, but HR leaders in particular. And leaning into that, AI is a huge component influencing that. So we found that there is a very, very finite minority who wouldn't say AI is a big concern, and certainly I understand many of you joining today are very intrigued to understand how that is disrupting and how it will continue to disrupt and enhance the opportunities for HR leadership, and I speak to my clients and hear of some really interesting and innovative ways they're using agents and chatbots to automate, but also to have self-service opportunities to streamline things like onboarding, policy review, general HR queries. So it really is something that has been, just speaking to a technology organization just yesterday, those agents are typically built in-house as well. So there's some really interesting things going on from that point of view. A large proportion, actually a majority of 54%, believe that they will be increasing or expanding their workforce in the next year. That, as I said, with economic headwinds is certainly interesting, but maybe talks to a little bit of an increase in confidence in the market of recent times. Upskilling, just we've talked about the pace of change there. Of course, 85% of individuals feel like new responsibilities, new technology skills will, really need to continue to upskill, so they're not left behind. And this may or may not surprise many of you on the call, but in terms of who are actively looking or considering changing their roles, that is 63% of our surveyed individuals at the HR leadership layer. We'll come on to maybe why that might be later, but that's maybe something that might sort of stick with you in terms of quite a significant proportion there. So moving on, so the key insights we took from the report were in terms of the challenge at the moment, HR leaders, I think, ever more are dealing with. They're leaning into their roles. Their roles are expanding. The volume of work is going up. Their expectations from other C-suite members and leaders across the business are ever increasing. And in an environment where there's so much change, transformation, leadership is critical to get right and to do it in a way that reduces risk, follows compliance with legislation and labor laws, and is managed in a fair and reasonable way. And this was a real strong sentiment that came out. Transformation is an ever increasing responsibility of that CPO or HR leader. So is something that came out, very, very prominently, as well as just from the typical stakeholder engagement to ensure that that's really firmly supported. There is we have a quote from one of our contributors, Kate Berry, the Chief People Officer of G'day Group. She has quite nicely articulated what her thoughts are in terms of, in the past, HR reporting to finance, or specifically the CFO role on the board. And now she looks at that and thinks, what was that thinking behind that? So I think there's an ever evolving reality that those more traditional historic ways that HR hadn't had a seat at the table are evolving. Look, some organizations that is still the case, but I think the right thing to do, and the more progressive organizations will always recognize that HR needs to have that voice on the important strategic outlook. So the need for human skills. So I just want to deep dive very quickly into what specific skills we're talking about here, and the sort of the top 5 that came through won't come as a surprise, no doubt, are resilience, strategic thinking, adaptability, and communication, and then those leadership skills. That's absolutely the case, and one individual really put it quite nicely. So I'm going to take the quote from Lucy Wilson, who's the Chief People and Culture Officer at Gumtree. So resilience is absolutely key in a Chief People Officer role, because we're not here just to have a really wonderful strategic discussions. We're here to move and shape, challenge when needed, and help guide the business to achieve its goals. So the EVP was a really significant talking point that came out. So that's, of course, the employee value proposition. And what we recognized is that there's an understanding of the importance of this to attract and retain staff and ensure employee experience and engagement stays high. But there's an acknowledgement as well that most organizations haven't quite cracked it yet, or haven't invested the resources and time to really get it right and have a refined and compelling sort of final version. Of course, it's ever evolving, but there was some quite honest feedback that's something if they had more time to really get right, then this is something that they would want to be investing in. So how will we adapt to this ongoing change within the CPO role, HR executive leadership role? Well, I mean, we recommend reducing the burden where you can, and delegating and sort of engaging with experts internally and externally, certainly where you've got partners who can provide solutions, talent solutions, recruitment, technology, qualified advice and other resources to stay ahead of competition, to maximize productivity. And then also that upskilling component that needs to be a consistent consideration at the forefront of the mind of HR leaders. And how we can help Hays, I'm not going to go into this slide in any real detail, but it was just to depict the broader services, obviously permanent and temporary recruitment, but also other services across the talent advisory landscape. And then finally from me, this is the QR code again to download the CPO Viewpoint report. There is also a CFO Viewpoint report as part of our C-suite series. So feel free to also download that, which is quite an interesting opportunity to cross-check the different findings from both reports, some of the similarities, but then also the differences are unique. And also just to flag that we are going to run a face-to-face event in Sydney on the Tuesday, the 12th of August, which will be an evolution to this and have a panel to discuss some of the findings. So stay tuned. I'll extend an invite to all attendees, but looking forward to hopefully seeing many of you there. So I believe that's everything from me. Mel, you ready to take up your?
I'm ready.
So
I'm ready to go.
Hand over the baton. So here you go.
Okay. Thanks, Will. So those results were really quite surprising to me, particularly the result about people wanting to change their jobs. I thought that came as a lot. So I thought I'd start off with a question just to make sure that you're all thinking and you're paying attention. How many of you have felt in the last 12 months like you're carrying more than ever, like you're doing more than ever? Show of hands or yeah. Sorry?
Some hands are going up there already,
yeah,
Mel.
Saying that, yeah. And even while those answers are coming through, if you cast your mind back to when you first decided that you wanted to take a role in HR and you wanted to do this people service business, is what you're doing now what you thought you were doing, or is it far more demanding than you ever thought it was going to be? Wow, no show of hands. Yeah. So I guess what you're saying and what you're feeling is really what the results in the CPO Viewpoint report tells us. And that's really what I wanted to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about why that is, why your role is bigger than ever, why your work or work within your purview is being plastered in regulator investigations, courtrooms, commissions. It's being critiqued, it's being scrutinised, how legislative reforms have created and continue to create more responsibility for you. Generations, how 4 generations of workers and their particular nuances and the intersection of those are creating challenges for you. How an increase in advisors and consultants and psychologists and all of these people with single stream skill sets who are entering the workforce are unwittingly contributing to the creation of more nervous managers who are then using HR as their Teflon shield or as their 2IC. And how we, in our desire and our best intention to serve and to fix and to be needed, are leaving ourselves shortchanged, thinly spread, and without the energy or the focus to create and do the things that really matter to us, the impact we desperately want to be known for, and that which our businesses and organisations and people really need. All of that, and a recent study I saw by the Next Group found that HR jobs has been in a steady decline, 19.2% decline in the year ending in April, which really says you're doing more with less, which is kind of the perfect scenario for burnout. When I first reached out to Will and we were talking about doing something together, it was really because I saw a multitude of sort of learnings and lessons and teachings, but they were all aimed at safety managers or people leaders or organisational managers, but there was nothing quite on HR about the change in your role and what you're actually carrying. And why do I love what you do? Because I do pretty much the same thing. I also take a set of circumstances, some longer than others. I identify issues, I consider the options, I pick a path forward. We take a step forward, we take a couple of steps back, we take a step sideways. We persist, we persuade, we influence, and then we can confirm the outcomes and reiterate that it's the best outcome we could have hoped for. So if you still want to do this and you're still with me, I'm hoping that at the end of today, when you leave, that you feel a bit seen, and not in a woke way, because I'm not overly PC, but more in a, it's important to take notice, to take a breath and to confront the reality of that the role is really hard, that it's harder than it's ever been, that there's a lot more going on and it's not about to get easier. And then I'd like to leave you with some information and some tips on what you can do, some tools for now. But there is a fair bit to get through. I naturally talk quite fast, so raise all of the questions, raise them in the chats. If there's no time to get through them today, we will definitely get to them over the next few days. And if you have a question that you want to ask or comment that you would like to make and it's more confidential, please feel free to email me and I will respond. I genuinely appreciate interaction, so keep it coming, even if I don't stop and address it in the moment. So we're covering 3 areas. I'm going to talk to first the challenges, the parts of the role that leave you or your employer exposed, being caught in the crosshairs between employees and the executive, and your responsibilities. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the need to learn, the need to speak up, and the need to be heard, which aren't necessarily the same thing. Lightening your load. And finally, I'm going to try and give you some tips on managing what I see in my experience as being important for you in your role. Control, personal branding, the power of allies, and recovery. So liability, for some reason, I can't actually see the slide, Will. I'm not sure if that's up, but it's...
Next slide.
Yeah, it's the slide of headlines. Hopefully everyone else can see it.
So we're on...
It's just a mashup of headlines, really, that was compiled basically from various sources, many of which I'm sure you probably subscribe to.
We're on. Sorry about that, everyone. I think we're just a little bit slow on the slides there, but we've got the headlines now. Well,
okay.
Over to you.
Amazing. So these are the ugly matters. These are the ones that usually involve a high degree of wrongdoing, or in some of the matters, just a lack of being willing to push a steerco, an exec team, a CEO, or a decision maker to do the right thing. It may be where they raised the correct answer, but were unable to persuade the right outcome and stood by while the wrong thing occurred. And I have great sympathy for some of the people that would have been involved in some of these matters. I see it play out quite often. Some of the cases are where notice was required to be paid at 5 weeks and in breach of the NES was paid at 4, or the HR manager who accepted a resignation where the employee's husband informed her that she wouldn't be returning to work on account of bullying. There's the Din Tai Fung HR manager who quite deliberately used migrant workers to avoid paying minimum wage. But these are the cases that you read about and you separate yourself from. You know, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't be involved in that. And I agree, because I know many of you and I know you wouldn't. But it does happen. And more importantly is the growing scope for it to happen. What I do want to spend some time talking to you about is where you might be personally exposed despite your good intentions. And so the exposure points, that might be the next slide. Well,
liability and exposure.
Yeah. So these are the main exposure points that I think that you're going to face. So I've done, and I continue to do a lot of work in the wage compliance space on both sides of the law. I've done it in the past. And all of you ought to know what process your business has in place to review or check that they are compliant with employee entitlements. And I can say, hand on my heart, having interacted with businesses who have contracts, enterprise agreements, and award coverage, to those with minimal award staff but junior professional staff, to government departments, to corporates, to those people who are good market payers, every single business is susceptible to what the legislation calls wage theft and has criminalised. It's a very emotive term. It's designed to make you feel like you're a thief in the night. In my humble opinion, there's probably more a level of contributory negligence in it. And because I mean, even people that study the English language would have trouble deciphering an industrial instrument. Nonetheless, having performed probably about 100 different business and government department not-for-profit checks across wage compliance and their payroll, I'm yet to issue a clean report. I've never issued one. The issue might change. It might be classification. It might be a rate issue. It might be the application of an entitlement. It might be overtime. It might be averaging of hours. It might be superannuation. It might be annualised salaries. There's lots of different reasons why, but there is always an issue. And I expect this work to continue to be at least 50% of the work that employment lawyers are doing, or those that practice in this area are doing, for some time. And I think it'll take a long time to resolve. The FWO doesn't often publish a view on what it will accept. And so the only way to really get through it and to understand it is to rely on the experience of those you're getting advice from. Get 2 opinions, get 3 opinions, but whatever you do, don't bury your head in the sand and don't move forward with an unclear path. I can't stress enough the importance of getting good advice and getting it early. I've seen very expensive advice that led to early and uninformed disclosures. I've seen consultants give advice that it's almost impossible to carry out properly. But what does it really tell me, all of these things? It tells me that you need to know, are you addressing it? What is your role? Are you exposed? Are you unable to speak up because of a power imbalance? How will you respond if the regulator comes knocking, if an employee makes a complaint? Have you advised the business to undertake a test of your payroll? Have you set up a process for it? Have you interrogated the process? Have you scrutinised the hours of the teams where you've been told no one's doing any overtime? There are so many things that you need to have a look at personally in your roles. And it's a bit similar with adverse action claims. There are very few proceedings which are pursued to a hearing. Most of these proceedings are usually settled. And that can be for a number of reasons, and it doesn't necessarily have to be because there's merit in the claim. But increasingly so in these claims are individuals being named. It's a practice many employee firms utilise where they know the pain and stress created will necessitate a settlement. Why select a HR manager or a HR leader? Well, it's often alongside the direct manager that you sit, mostly because you're quickly decisions, you're at the forefront of leading to terminations or performance discussions or a conduct matter. But you're always in the scene, you're always in the shot. So it leaves you liable, it leaves you exposed, and it leaves you sort of a sitting target. So psychosocial safety. So those of you who follow me on LinkedIn or have spoken to me before will know that I'm a little bit obsessed with this at the moment. It crosses two of my passions very neatly and allows me to sort of tap into months spent with organisational psychologists, learning about business design and structural exposures, but also my experience as a safety prosecutor. What do I consider the risk will be to you or the exposure will be to you? Well, generally speaking, safety teams are smaller than HR teams. They're often less integrated into the business. They sort of sit a little bit separately. They're less interactive with the people in the business because they usually provide their advice or their work from an arm's length approach. If that rings true for your business, I'd be asking myself, how will the safety team manage their psychosocial safety policy or plan in the workplace? And I'd say the answer to that is going to be with your help. I often joke in my safety presentations on psychosocial safety that if you want to know where the bodies are buried or where your hazards really exist, make friends with the HR team because they're the people who know. And what do I mean by that? If you're doing your job well, and I know that you are, you already know where most of your potential people risks lie. You know the business decisions that have posed the most risk to people's well-being, which departments lost the headcount, whose hours have been increased, whose roles are less defined, the history of departments or teams where the workload is always a concern, which manager or partner or boss people continuously complain about or who has high turnover in their staff count. You might have even observed a comment or two or a tone in a remark that made you wonder what happens if you pull at that little string. But you know far more than you probably think. What does that mean for you? Well, sometimes we know and we don't do much with the information. How many times have you heard yourself think or say to yourself, "Ugh, not again," or "Yeah, that one's a bit of a challenge, I'll talk to them." It happens, right? What's the risk to you? Do you have a clear understanding of your role in the psychosocial safety plan? Do you know what the plan is? Do you know how it's being rolled out? Do you have any concerns with it? I've recently heard a lot of slightly blasé responses, either "and I should be okay, I've always actioned matters brought to my attention quickly," and we're actually very good at leaning into people issues. But here's the thing, we're mostly trained to be reactive. Poor performance, let's work out how to improve it. Poor economy, let's reduce the headcount. New law, let's get a new policy, let's do some training. We're very reactive. Why is this different? Safety legislation doesn't afford you the luxury to wait for something to happen before it has to get raised. You have to be proactive. You have to act before the risk becomes or comes into fruition, before the bullying complaint is made, before the stress claim is raised. You have to be so alert and aware that, much like my mum, you have to be under the dust before it falls. It requires, absent anyone telling you that there's an issue, you acting on the issue that you think or you know may exist nonetheless. and you have to do something. You might not be able to eliminate it because they are usually people orientated, but you may need to put in steps to minimise it. The challenge I see in many organisations, even the sophisticated ones, sometimes more so, is that the safety manager is still learning about psychosocial safety too. And even if they have a great understanding of what it is, they're still trying to influence a board or an executive team on what needs to be done. But remember, you can be held personally responsible in a safety prosecution. And if the regulator goes easy on you and doesn't prosecute you, in all likelihood, you will be interviewed, you'll be referenced, you'll be scrutinised, you'll be criticised in a regulatory investigation or in a prosecution proceeding. And it would be very unusual for you not to be a witness. So what do? Ask the questions. Find out what you need to know. Find out everything about your role and what you're supposed to be doing to be part of your psychosocial safety policy. And then remember, when the regulator does come knocking, it'll be you that they want to sit with. They'll want all of your information. They'll want your policies. They'll want your grievance procedures. They'll want to know what happens if a complaint is in practice, who's responsible for it, who pushes it forward, who communicates with the complainant and the respondent to the complaint. All of that information sits within your purview. So that probably segues neatly into policies. And the reason that I've referenced policies and procedures and practices is because we really need to be across them. Read them again, read them again. I know there's not a lot of vacant real estate in my brain, so I can't remember everything that I see and read in a policy, but we really have to stay on top of it because there are so many decisions, too many for me to even go through, but so many that hinge on a flaw in a people process, a term that was missing in a contract, a contractual term that was poorly drafted, a policy that wasn't followed, a procedure that existed but has been inconsistently applied across different sites or different departments, policies that are outdated or don't reflect current requirements, and current outdated training that doesn't really reflect current legislation. The other thing I will say, avoid having too many policies, because not knowing what your policies are that should apply in the circumstance can also be a challenge, and you also get caught out on. I recently worked with an organisation where the compliance lead thought the more policies they had, the more compliant the organisation was. And as long as they were all published on the intranet, they were given. It was a given that they were being complied with. And I don't think I've ever been so shocked in a really long time. It was a big, sophisticated organisation too, which means anyone can really get it wrong. But really know your policies and know your contracts and review them. Have them reviewed. Have someone have a look at them. There's no better time to roll out a new contract than end of financial year with pay rises coming. So maybe get cracking on it. And the final one is witness exposure. And I've touched on this a little bit in some of the other things I've already said, but you can be a witness in an independent investigation, in an internal ER investigation, in a workers' comp investigation, in a regulatory investigation, in a commission inquiry, in a court proceedings, in so many different ways. I can't imagine a people-related matter in which you wouldn't be a witness. Some of you, I'm sure, have already had to give evidence or have already been a witness or given a statement. And those of you who know and have done it can share. It's stressful. Nobody really wants to do it. I've worked with CEOs who will do anything to avoid it and pay any amount in a settlement to avoid it. Most lawyers spend their careers trying to avoid it. For many of you, it's inevitable and it will happen at some point in time. But, you know, it's very confronting in these interviews to have your work reviewed, to have your decisions reviewed, to go through the circumstances. And we all know, in hindsight, it's 2020, right? So I'll talk a little bit later about my tips with that one, but it's probably just important to know the information is your armour when it comes to being a witness. So don't become the story is what I've said there, but the reality is sometimes you will be, and it's okay. You just want to, because it might be a necessary component of your job, but you just want to be best prepared to be so. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about who do you serve, the ongoing and the disconnect between the executive or your management team or the business itself and the employees. So this is, if you've ever felt like a staff member or an employee thought you were a spy on a secret mission to garner intel on them to share with management, or alternatively, if you've ever felt like the business ignored existing employee concerns and prioritised discussions on business needs or bottom lines, there's always been a perception of a disconnect for HR. Whether you're advocating on the employee side or you're pushing a company agenda, there always has been. It's amplified where there are cultural issues within the business, which might be because of budget cuts, restructures, realignments, other business crises. Generally, poor leadership, which has led down to a breakdown of trust and transparency. These are also issues that increase in tougher economic times. So, if there are rumours about people being cut, contractors being cut, work being condensed, or projects being disbanded, those sorts of things, it can create a real tension in the two roles. And the last reason why the role is so hard, I'm inclined to say there's just too much to do. It's like looking at my house at the end of the week, There's clothes at one end, there's shoes at one end, there's bags at one end, there's toys everywhere. And you just want to sit for a minute and just think, I don't even know where to start. But there's an over-involvement of HR in people leadership, or a lack of good boundaries often between managers and HR. I've noticed it with the influx of consultants whose experience is enviable and it's amazing, but they often steer people towards HR, a bit like, HR is the 1-800 answer to all people problems. And what do we get with that? We get nervous managers, we get poor boundaries, and now you're doing their job or coaching them through it, which is great if that's your primary functionality, or if you have a team big enough so that you can resource that, but it's time consuming and it restricts your ability to get other things done. The legislation change, it's keeping me busy and employed, but I sit on a committee with some really smart employment lawyers who I deeply respect. And when they say it's hard to stay on top of the change and understand it, I feel a bit like, I can drop my bravado and say, it's been an exhausting few years. There's been way too much learning. But fixed term contracts, that was a tricky one for those particularly in the global mobile market. It's a real pain. It's quite obviously not contemplated by lawmakers. But so much change, so much transformation. It's a project management role. It's a precise planning and agile skill set. It was not traditionally HR, but more peripherally so. We used to work in our own lanes, but now they've all sort of blurred together. And the different generations is something we're not addressing holistically yet, but we're seeing the reality of. We're seeing the intersect of it. I've heard looking down the generations and commenting on the lazy, the entitled, the can't tough it out like we did. I've heard the why would you have put up with that? Someone was actually said to me and caused me to pause for a second. But I've heard the looking up at the generation and saying, you got to rest on your laurels because of nepotism, because of connections. You've never had to hustle. So there are different perceptions of different generations, and there are 4 generations in the workplace. We're not always going to understand or appreciate the difference. But it really does come to HR to try to effectively communicate with all of them, and it's not easy. And that is amongst all of your other ongoing responsibilities. You've got REM, retention, talent acquisition, surveys, performance management, injury management, complaints, meetings. There are so many things. So hopefully it's not all doom and gloom, and there is some light here. And while I spent a lot of time talking about all the doom and gloom, I'm hoping that you'll see that there are some things that you can do to lighten your load. I think that might be our next slide, Will.
Right.
Sorry. Yeah. So there's a couple of things that I think are probably the most important ones that we can do to make it a bit easier. And the first one is learn. So make sure you know your gaps, and then find the knowledge to bridge them. There are so many resources available to us now. Podcasts, a number of great publications that you can subscribe to, newsletters from providers. We're all time poor, but the bus, the train, the walk home, even if you can get a little snippet of information in, that 10 minutes of information is probably more than what most people are getting. So reach out to your network, see who they follow, see who shares a point of view in a way that resonates with you, and just have a quick squiz when you get a couple of minutes. Beyond that, get bespoke HR training. Ask for it, get it. We create it for boards to know their obligations. We do it for legal teams. We do it for safety teams. What bespoke training do HR receive? Is it to perform a function, or is it to advise you on how you do your job? Do you know your personal exposure? Do you need to? I would say you do, but make sure you're getting that training. Make sure you know what your role really is involving. And learn about the policies that intersect with your role. Find out about your psychosocial safety responsibilities. What other procedures do you play a part in? Learn about the information that exists in your business. Do you know how many complaints there were in the last financial year? Do you know how many avenues they came through? Do you know the categories they fell within? Do you know those which were substantiated? Do you have the analysis over which departments do have an idea as to why? Use the data to drive your advice, and it ups your influence. And finally, I'm a bit of a hypocrite here, and Will can probably talk more sensibly to this, but lean into the tech. I mean, find out about your ability to use AI. Personally, I think it's still a little bit in its infancy, but like safety, L&D teams will ultimately look to HR to ensure AI is being used in a compliant and appropriate and approved manner. In addition, while we're human-centric functions, there are processes and procedures that are somewhat formulaic. That we could utilize AI to simplify or to streamline or to check. Perhaps not entirely, but with some refining, it can likely be used to help with statistical or data analysis too. And then the next one is be part of business discussions. So this one really does depend on your role and the structure of your organisation, but ultimately, really what I'm saying here is be involved and present when strategic objectives are being set. Be prepared and armed with your data and analysis, and be ready to speak up with how the plans align with your view of the current state of the workforce. What's going to be a challenge in achieving the agenda that someone's trying to roll out? Maybe it's your staff turnover. Maybe it's the cost of the turnover. Maybe it's a talent issue. To do this well, you have to understand your people challenges, your people limitations. You must know what you will need to achieve what is being proposed. You must know your market trends for the skills necessary in your area. And you can't just be a passive listener. You have to be a strategic partner. And then once you've designed a people strategy that addresses the business strategy, and you take it back to what it was supposed to be, decide how it's going to work, decide what support it needs, what change, what communications, what new policies, what new procedures, how are you going to give the policy effect, how are you going to give this plan effect, and then become a custodian of the culture. From talent acquisition, performance expectations, role descriptions, management styles, training and development, review and revise the processes, and keep your messaging and your communications consistent so that everything is designed to angle towards meeting that strategy. Market it, advertise it, publish the position, make sure people know what that position is, and then champion the change, lead it, communicate it, and roll it out. That's the transformation role that you're all going to become a part of. And then the next slide, I talk a little bit about delegation. So you cannot, and you are not meant to, do it all alone. Find your network. Who do you trust? Who can help you with what you need to achieve? And how can you ensure you have access to that resource? How do you persuade the business that you need that resource? The data, the analysis, your comfortability, your stress, your ability to get all things done. One of the things I do a lot of is partnering with internal teams. In larger organisations, it's the HR team at all levels. In smaller organisations, it's the HR team, organisational managers. To do what? To be their soundbite. I'm there quickly to provide ideas, options, check outcomes, check strategies, support decisions, give other options, provide an alternative viewpoint, advise on what should happen next, provide a second opinion. I help with strategy, I help with discipline meetings, I help with performance management meetings. But all you need is someone there that you trust, that you can rely on, that you know will be available for you to bounce your idea off when you're not quite sure that it's the right thing to do, or when you can't quite see if there's a different option. And sometimes it's just because you're too overloaded and you're too busy to do it, or your team is. So what does it really do? It saves matters getting out of hand. It saves spending a fortune at some later time trawling through the history of a matter and settling a claim because it has business exposure to it. But you need to ascertain and identify who you can also delegate work to. And there's a shift in the market. You know, it might be that you want to delegate talent acquisition. You might want to go out and say, okay, we've been trying to hire for this role for a really long time. We can't. We need to just outsource this now. It might be training. It might be policy reviews. It might be contract reviews. But there are always going to be things that you can take off your plate and pass on and delegate. And it's really important that you identify what that low-hanging fruit is and that you move it on so that you can continually focus on the bigger things, because there are a lot of big things. And the final part of my presentation, which is the most relaxing part really, is being at the coalface, being a frontline provider. And I know what you're thinking when you see this slide. It's a bit dramatic, and it is. I'll accept it is. But who looks a person in the eye when they cry and say they've just bought a new house, or we've just had a baby, or my partner's just been made redundant, and nonetheless produces the termination papers for signing? Who steps forward to listen when someone explains they think they've been sexually harassed? Who hears about someone's domestic violence, death in the family, cancer diagnosis, or other tragic circumstance, and then goes into their next meeting to celebrate someone's performance promotion or someone's tenure or someone's amazing project achievements? I think that qualifies as frontline service provision. And when I was drafting scripts for people or setting an agenda for a meeting, I frequently think to myself, thank goodness that it's not me going into that meeting. Because when you call me and you share with me how it went and you're emotional and upset and it's so many things, I think, yeah, I couldn't do that. I can draft the script, but I don't want to sit there and do that. It is tough. So don't underestimate it. Doing so is just, it's not just doing yourself a disservice. It's also not recognizing that, you know, all those that you lead in your team and the managers you support, what they're going through too. So here are my top tips. I'm going to start with a legal one because I feel like I should, and, you know, it's probably the most boring one, so we'll get it out of the way. Control. The easiest thing in control, if you're like me and your memory isn't the greatest and you can't remember what you did yesterday, leave aside this morning, then become a really good note taker. My top tip for taking notes is send yourself an email. If you have a meeting with an employee or a member of your team or a member of management, send yourself an email, brief outline what the meeting was about, and email it to yourself. Why? It's contemporaneous, it's quick. If there's a complaint later, it's stored chronologically in order, and it's very easily accessible. That's generally what I do. And create your own habit. Be consistent in your approach with how you deal with things. Be clear on what you say is right or wrong in a situation or what the next steps must be. Set clear goals, set clear agendas. Don't leave people confused or needing to ask questions. Make sure everybody understands and is on the same page when they're leaving. And sometimes it helps to have, you know, it doesn't have to be a formal documentation, but it can just be a note that's sent to someone and they're given an opportunity to say, oh, I don't think that that's right, or didn't we also discuss this? check your policies, check your procedures, any internal practice. Is there something you're supposed to do? Is there something you're supposed to know? Is there something you're supposed to tell somebody? Does your response align with those policies and procedures? Don't assume it does, please. And finally, ask questions gently. Seek feedback, give feedback, be mindful. But these are things within your control. This is how we learn. We're all learning. We're always going to be learning. But these are the things within your control that you can do. The other things are set boundaries between yourself and management. Don't do their job. Create good habits. Make it your mission to speak up, not to say nothing of value, few things more annoying than that, but contribute. Be part of the discussion. I was going to talk to you a little bit about your brand. That might be the next slide.
Yep.
So your personal brand is what people say about you or think of you when you're not around. It takes pretty high EQ to lean into this, but it's important. It's your reputation. It's how the business, the people, your industry, and more broadly than that, recruiters and prospective employers see you. So what do you want to be known for? How do you want to be perceived? Sometimes we have a strong brand, having not intentionally committed to its creation, and that's okay. But it's good to be intentional about it as well. Are you commercial? Are you fair? Are you tough? Ultimately, it connects with your seat at the table and your ability to influence the potential to bring people on your journey. And that sort of leads into allies. Who are your people? Who are your people that support you? Who are the people that are sitting at the table with you who are going to nod and agree as you're speaking, who are going to champion your proposals or your decisions or your thoughts? Who are the department managers, the EAs, the colleagues, the in-house lawyers? Who are the people that are going to give you support and that you can support? Find those people. It's really important. And then very quickly, I'm going to talk about recovery, resilience, and basically you. And this next slide is really just a mashup of things, some, none, all of which may appeal to you. But basically, debrief. You're going to go through tough calls, tough meetings, tough situations. Find that person that you trust to reestablish your confidence with when things go wrong. Find that person that you can talk to who's not going to disclose what you say, who you can be frank, who you can be yourself, and who you can be inappropriate with even. And finally, don't underestimate the value of connecting with people outside of your work, your industry, friends maybe, your other friends. Having a quiet night, doing your exercise, watching trash TV, whatever makes you feel better, make sure you lean into those two things too. Because we're more than just our jobs. We're mums, we're wives, we're daughters, we're fathers, we're brothers, we're uncles, we're neighbours, we're shoppers, cleaners, drivers, social directors. We're a lot of things, and it's important to a lot of other people that we keep functioning too. So know your limits and take your breaks. And then I think my final slide is really just a bit of a summary and an overview, which is mostly to say it's tough. It's a tough gig at the moment. Look after yourself, know what you have to do, know what you want to do, and make sure you get the support for the rest of it. Yeah, so that's mostly, how did I go for time? I'll see, I didn't go on for too long. Yeah.
Pretty good. A few minutes left to discuss some questions, but I think on behalf of people listening, I'm sure they've taken away a lot from you there, Mel. Thank you very much for contributing your expertise. And on expertise, we will have a little bit of time to cover off a couple of questions. So I'll maybe fire one back to you, Mel, to kick us off. So Mel, do you think there'll be an increase in right to disconnect claims following the recent matter filed, and what role will HR play in these?
Yeah, so the right to disconnect, gosh, it was such a tricky one. This is such a good question. I don't think the right to, I mean, I think that there's been lots of claims about the right to disconnect, and we've quietly settled to them, to be perfectly honest. I don't think anyone really wants to see the light of day on it. I think the real challenge with the right to disconnect is that it's going to have an intersection with an underpayment of wages at some point in time, because it's about out of hours business conduct. And that would be my greater concern, is what it's going to become and how people are going to try and get money out of the claim or just attention. So yes, I think we're likely to see more of it. I also think that there's lots more employee-friendly law firms, and they're very creative with their claims. You know, I can't criticize them. It keeps me employed again, but they're very creative.
Mhm.
So I think there's more to come. Well, I might ask you one, Will.
Fire away.
I liked this one the most. I'm going to start with it. But what are some of the common reasons people are rejected from progressing towards more senior HR roles?
Yeah, look, I think I've sort of touched on it a little bit with regards to the CPO Viewpoint survey findings and what is increasingly more and more important for the role, which really is the ability to strategize, to connect to the commercial realities of an organization. So what does that mean in practice? It means ensuring that you can balance and understand the needs of the organization, the objectives of the organization, and proactively ensure that you are following and executing your HR role in line with that. So whether that's, you know, on a coaching basis with key stakeholders, whether it's supporting organizational development programs that really turn the dial, I think an awareness of that, but articulating it and then proactively supporting the organization in achieving it, that you know, whether in a BAU environment or in a transformation and change capacity, I think it needs to be a common thread throughout the way you behave and the way you impact your roles. So I think that's probably the one I would call out. And I'll fire a question again back to you, Mel, because we've got just a couple of minutes left. So we have a significant increase in the neurodivergence diagnosis in our workforce. So what do I need to know or do differently?
This is a real tricky one. I mean, it's true of society in most workplaces. And I think that there's no one size fits all. I think we all have to get comfortable with having an uncomfortable conversation. I think we have to find out what works and what doesn't work for the individual. What we can and what we can't do to accommodate their specific needs once we understand what the needs are. And I think we have to lean into discussions about how comfortable they are with other people learning about this diagnosis if we are making adjustments that are going to be obvious to the greater workforce. But we're all still learning. So I say lean in, ask, be curious, and be open-minded. There's a superpower in everything. We just have to connect the dots to how we're going to work with it, really. But I think it'll impact a couple of things. I think that you know, we might need to do training differently. We might need to do workspaces differently. We might need to do meetings differently. But we just need to stay open, and we need to encourage people to communicate.
Wonderful. Well, thanks very much for that, Mel, and thanks for your answers to those questions. But thank you for your collaboration on this webinar today, not just yourself but the broader McCabes team and your marketing teams, both across Hayes and McCabes. So we couldn't have done it without them, and you know, this is your idea, so I'll credit you with this you know, this a great you know, opportunity to speak with you today. These are our contact details. As I've mentioned, we have the event on Tuesday the 12th of August in Sydney. There will be other Hayes events across the country for the CPO Viewpoint. Any final words, Mel, before we wrap up today?
No, I think have a great day, and thanks so much for joining in, and reach out to me if you have any questions or any comments. I love to hear what people think.
Excellent. Thank you all.
Thanks, Will. Bye, guys.